but let's have some perspective here. And again, I'm not saying it's not roaming for life, but I don't want to treat it like an emergency petition either, right? So something in the gray area of that, but I think there's perfectly good reason to have them do work that we mentioned earlier. If they need to do neuroceptive work, because they also have panic disorder, they keep going into panic attacks. Let's work on that. You know, there's no reason why we can't hit the pause button and do that for a couple of sessions and gain some more agency and confidence about anxiety as a general sense not being dangerous, but just uncomfortable.
Yeah, and you're saying taking how much are you running into suicidality? How do you deal with that, sort of that boundary between post-mortem?
I mean, I would deal with that, you know, not specifically from an CBT standpoint, but yeah, I certainly see that. And I think you have to make that the focus of treatment. You know, I would work on emotional regulation. I would work on building a sense of community that this person feels connected to, and I would build confidence in their access to those things, like the hope box and various other strategies that people can use for that. But if you're talking about OCD where it's what if I'm suicidal, what if I'm going to hurt myself versus what it actually is, that's also a sticky area, because we know from data that OCD is all you need to be at risk for suicide. You don't need a comorbid condition. So we got to take it seriously. That sometimes means, you know, shifting the focus of treatment.
You find it though increasing or reduced?
Yeah, that's what the data says too. Is the more severe forms of OCD and BD, the higher risk of suicidal ideation and suicide attempts are. So I think you have data if your Y-box is 40 or higher, if the person has a previous attempt, right? If they're using substances regularly, these are sort of the posthumous analysis of risk for suicide. And we're terrible at predicting who's going to try it, right? So it just makes sense.
Catastrophic
Right. Anything that's sort of disruptive. All right, is it okay if I plow through my data slides and then we just spend the rest of time on questions? How much time do we have in total?
12.
12 minutes? There's data. There's more data. And it seems to be stronger than any of the OCQ, the OBQ beliefs that the obsessive compulsive cognitions working group found in the late 90s, early 2000s. So inferential confusion is a stronger and more stable predictor of OCD than any of the 6 belief domains. So if you look at the totality of the research of the belief domains, there are inconsistencies, right? So perfectionism, it has a hard time being separated from intolerance from uncertainty. Factor intolerance from uncertainty is shown higher in non-clinical samples than clinical samples and substudies. There is variability. It doesn't seem to be the same variability. High levels of inferential confusion are a very strong cognitive predictor of OCD. So it's worth us paying attention to this particular mechanism, and I think the research is growing to support that. Next slide. This is the first trial that was done in 2005, the first randomized controlled trial. So I need to speak into this thing, don't I? So you can put it on. This is is it happening?
Oh, sorry.
So O'Connor, Kieran O'Connor, the late Kieran O'Connor, this is the first RCT, 2005, comparing ICBT to what they call CAM, Cognitive Appraisal Model, involved ERP plus cognitive therapy. Right? So this did have, and then it also has ERP as a separate. Now you can notice that ERP has a much lower Y-box score at pre-treatment, so it's lower at post-treatment. None of it was statistically different from each other. So a effect size of 0.68, which is moderate, but it was also a low sample. Right? The treatment arms each had like 17 people on it, so it was a small RCT. But it's effective, and this one also showed ICBT performing better for revived ideation, and the treatment effects held for 6 months. That was the follow-up. Next one. This is the multi-center RCT done in the Netherlands. Heady Visser and her crew, you can click in 2 times. You'll see some arrows. But what we're looking at here is at a 3-month follow-up, we see large effect sizes at post-test and at the follow-up, which is 3 months, at 1.8 and 2.0. These are super large effect sizes. We get 2.6 and 2.4 for the ICBT group. At the time, it's called IBA, Inference-based approach. If you go to the next slide, there's a sub-analysis done, or a secondary analysis done, of just the group of people with an OVIS score of over 6. Over 6 means high levels of overvalue ideation, and the effect size difference is super large and super significantly different from the CBT group. So, and these are much larger sample sizes in a larger trial. This sample size here is just an N of 23. But it's substantial enough to sort of see if we can replicate this. So we go to the next one. This was an open trial in 2016. ICBT across symptom dimensions, right? So it's not a randomized trial. ICBT reduced all symptom dimensions. White box reductions at 44% approximately. Treatment group of 102, effect size of 1.8, super large effect size. So these are in the upper limit of effect sizes reported in meta-analyses of CBT, ERP, or OCD. So we're starting to show a trend here. So we're not seeing statistically significant differences between ERP and ICBT for treatment. So maybe we need to run some non-inferiority trials. So let's do one more RCT. And this was the most recent one by Fred Ardema and his group in 2022, a multi-center RCT, 3 treatment arms, ICBT, mindfulness-based stress reduction, and ERP. All of them had significant lowering of OCD. This is the first clinical trial, randomized control trial, to show mindfulness actually treated OCD without explicit exposures. That needs to be replicated. It wasn't as robust a finding, and it didn't hold up as well as ICBT over a 6-month follow-up, but an effect size of 1.9. One more slide. We can probably skip. I'll just leave that there. We can probably skip the other ones in favor of questions. So what we're noticing here is just that the data trend shows treats OCD well, it's safe. It holds up 3 and 6 months. It works with overvalue ideation very well across symptom dimensions. So now we need to do non-inferiority trials. ERP has not been subjected to non-inferiority trials before. Nothing else has come to the position where we want to. Right? So ICBT did it. They were both wrapped up and done. Large sample sizes in both as you need for an RCT that's non-inferiority. Preliminary data shows non-inferiority. All that means is equivalence, clinically speaking. ICBT is in adult populations. ICBT shows equivalence. Doesn't do that with kids because we don't have data for kids. So what does this mean? It means that all that data is going to be meta-analyzed in 2025 at some point. The 5 RCTs and probably the open trial and the other clinical trials will be put in there, and there'll be a total of 13 or 14 clinical trials that will be meta-analyzed and then submitted to the various governing boards for the UK and Scotland and the US to see if it can be listed as an empirically supported treatment, which I suspect it will be. I'm done, and now I'll take more questions. We have 6 minutes for questions. I don't know the answer to that. I know that the same thing was found in Jenna Reed's recent meta-analysis of ERP, where she looked at 36 RCTs, and including 2 of them were actually ICBT trials in that meta-analysis, Visser's and Kieran's first trial. And how they measure researcher bias is debatable, because I themselves could have a bias. So I think that's an issue to be addressed moving forward. A problem true of trial outcomes, and maybe why we should move towards mechanisms, generally speaking, to avoid getting caught up in researcher allegiance. I do think that the person conducting the therapy should be allegiant to their model, and that may create confounds in a trial, but buy-in when working with a client behind a closed door. So I don't really see it as a bad thing clinically.
Is ICBT assuming that compulsions will just drop away? Or is there some space for working with that response prevention? Where does that fit in?
So conceptually, yes, the compulsion would not be utilized anymore because it needs to reconcile nothing, right? That doesn't mean that you can't do response prevention if that outcome didn't occur, right? And that's where we need to sort of be flexible with our treatment models. If you did ICBT and it didn't get the outcome you're looking for, then you can tack on some response prevention to finish the job, and I don't think there's anything blasphemous about that.
Do you find that in your own clinical work sometimes?
With some of the cases that have high comorbidities with anxiety disorders, yes. The anxiety disorder seems to, especially people who have like panic disorder, PTSD, I find that combining anxiety work can be really helpful. But we have to be careful to not combine it in a way that removes fidelity to the treatment of the inferential confusion. Because if we're going to use exposure work with OCD and stay within fidelity to this model, you have to augment it, right? We have to like not work on tolerating uncertainty, because that's the opposite of resolving inferential confusion. We don't do imaginal exposures, because that will further you into dissociative absorption, further you into inferential confusion conceptually. And we wouldn't be looking to do habituation. We'd be looking to use exposures to facilitate reality sensing.
That's important.
I don't know if I can. I'm dissociating.
Because, I do a lot of like scripts and stuff, but I need to know like when am I not supposed to?
Don't think of these as rules, because then we get into trouble and we start getting dogmatic about treatments. I would say, doing scripts doesn't fit into the ICBT treatment protocol because it doesn't facilitate connection to reality. Treatment script, or exposure scripts are intended to immerse you into the consequences, and that's a quote from, I think, Dean McKay's recent webinar on how to use exposure scripts. It's intentionally getting you lost inside the scary story to facilitate habituation. And if it works well, right? But if it doesn't, it can get you lost inside of inferential confusion. So, depending on what treatment you're using, it would depend on whether or not you're using exposure scripts.
In your professional experience, do you find that if the ratio is more obsessions than compulsions, you have more success, or does it not really matter the ratio to which that applies?
It's a really good question. I haven't parsed out that data clinically. So when I look at the Y box, I'm like, look, the obsession score is higher than, I'm just going, they have OCD. And now it's a lot less. So I wish I could be more thorough in answering that.
Did you say that mindfulness-based stress reduction had in the initial trials comparable results to?
Yeah, they all lowered OCD with large effect sizes.
So do you use mindfulness-based stress reduction with your team, or is?
I'm not trained in MBSR. I think mindfulness is an incredibly useful tool. And to my knowledge, there hasn't been any other randomized trials that looked at it for OCD alone. That's an interesting find. It needs to be replicated before we've actually looked at that as an option. But I think it speaks to the idea that, there is a cognitive process that can cause a substantial shift that doesn't necessarily require deliberate, prolonged exposures. Something I feel less to wrestle with conceptually is provoking exposures required for treatment for OCD. And maybe for some people it is, and maybe for some people it isn't. Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
Not not as significantly, but yes.
And then, if somebody has gone through therapy, if there are areas where he's taking some symptoms, and eye infection, and if so, is it confusing because there's so many.
I've had clients before I learned ICBT that I was doing more Americanized ERP, tolerant uncertainty, kind of stuff. And they got better a little bit, fell off the face of it, came back a couple years later, OCD was raging again. And I had this new way of looking at it that would be helpful. And it was a bit of a learning curve because they learned it in a way that was like, this is the right way. And that's my fault for trying to suggest that like, it's a way that helps rather than the way that you must do it. And I think it created some concern for them. Well, I don't want to make my OCD worse. And so, again, knowing how to explain it in layperson's terms that they get is usually all you really need. Then we can just say, let's see what happens. I think we're out of time. Thank you, everybody.